Welcome everyone. We'll give folks just a minute to join us as they're coming into the room. Let me make sure I get myself situated here. As people are coming in, I will introduce myself. My name is Elizabeth Black, and I too am with C4 Innovations. I've been with you all at least one time before, actually on site in Rhode Island, talking about, I believe, harm reduction and provider wellness. So it's good to be with this group again, and I am back today to talk to you about provider wellness. As we go through this today, I'm a pretty informal trainer, so it's pretty hard to offend me. So as I'm going through this, if you have any questions you want to ask or comments, things that you want to add in based on your own experiences, you're always welcome to unmute and jump in. Or alternatively, I've got the chat box open, so I will be keeping an eye on that, and you're welcome to put thoughts or questions in there as well, and I will make sure I capture them well. So for our time together today, we got 90 minutes, and I know that you guys have probably been through provider wellness a time or two in your lifetime, also known as self-care. And what I have found for myself, also being a clinician, is I get to the point where I think, oh my God, if I have to sit through one more self-care training that tells me I need to get 8 hours of sleep, I'm going to scream. So trying to take it a little bit different direction today. Maybe you'll hear some new stuff. Maybe it's building on stuff that you already know. And if that's the case, I certainly welcome folks to join in and to add to what I'm saying. But at the meantime, at the very least, hopefully we're not all taking naps by the end of it. Good morning, Chris. Good morning, Stephanie. Thank you for saying hello. Good to be with you this morning. So first I want to start with what I'm going to call the elephant, or the elephant in the room. And, the fact of the matter is that attending to the emotional and spiritual demands of working with a high-risk population is absolutely imperative. And that's not the elephant in the room. We know that, and we have known that since our first day stepping on to this job. The elephant in the room is that it is especially true in these unprecedented times that we are dealing with and we are still seeing right now in our country. The people that we work with, our primary population that we serve, are being villainized on a national stage and being used as scapegoats. And we, as we're watching more and more funding being stripped from us, we are being asked to make even more magic with even less beans. And I want to name all of that because it's just that this is not normal, what we're seeing right now. And if you are feeling overly stressed, concerned, world weary, battle worn, you are absolutely not alone in that. And so just want to make explicit acknowledgement that our job is hard during the best of times, but now where we are, which probably wouldn't be categorized as that, it becomes even more daunting for us. And so given that context, we make self-care, we make a pitch for self-care during all times, but this absolutely right now is nothing short of a survival mechanism. So self-care, or what I'm calling in this training neural maintenance, actually becomes a form of resistance ourselves, in that we're able to shore ourselves up to make sure that we can weather the storms and the giant waves that are headed into our harbor right now. We'll do the obligatory basics that every self-care training is supposed to have, just so I can say that I have, and just a gentle reminder to all of us in the room that, the basics are taking just good care of ourselves. So that looks like making sure that we're eating a balanced diet. This infographic that you see in front of you is the latest version of food recommendations by the CDC. And younger generations might have remembered the food pyramid, or when I was a kid, it was the basic 4 food groups. So this is the latest version of that. So we just want to make sure that all of our meals are nice and balanced as much as possible, that we're engaging in physical activity. This is also such an important part of both self-care and what I'm calling neural maintenance, which is care for our nervous system. The CDC recommends that we get 2.5 hours every week. And that can sound like a lot, but remember that's broken over an entire week. And so you can break that up in any way that's meaningful to you. You could do 2 1-hour trainings and a half-hour training. You could do 3 45-minute trainings every week. You could do 5 30-minute trainings 5 days a week, or you could do 20 minutes once a day every week. And the science has shown that we can actually break that down even further. And if we take that 20 minutes once a day, we can actually turn that into 2 10-minute walks, and we will meet our recommendation for physical activity. And I just kind of share and remind folks of that because for a lot of us, when we think of physical activity, it comes in the form of, oh, I've got to sign up for a gym membership, or I've got to start training for a marathon. And it doesn't have to be anything like that big, grandiose, giant commitment. It really is just about doing what you can to move your body when you can. Also, a pitch for making sure we're getting good sleep, anywhere from that 7 to 9 hours every night. I know that's a lot easier said than done in our busy lives, but our well-being depends so much on being well rested because it's so important to the basic maintenance of our body. And then, of course, making sure we're taking care of good stress management and including the importance of connection, being with our loved ones, our friends, our coworkers that make us feel good, our pets, and also the importance of play. Like we have to get out of this, work until, from sun up to sundown, because we have to have space for other things in our life, such as play. So that is my obligatory, you've heard this before, but I'm going to revisit it because it is important. But now that we've got that in the books, we're going to move forward from here. So what I do want to start with is thinking about what self-care is not, because when you hear self-care, people kind of already kind of glaze over. They've heard this a million times before, or they think we're talking about like hot bubble baths, and that's not necessarily what we're talking about at all. For some people, it may be the hot bubble bath, but self-care can be completely different than that. But the one thing that I do really want to reinforce is what self-care is not, because we get very guilty of falling into these beliefs. So self-care is not selfish. It's not unimportant. It's not a chore. It's not last on the list to get to as we have time. It's certainly not a luxury. And it's not any other faulty bull honky we tell ourselves. That's a clinical term I brought with me from Oklahoma. And it's also not this. How many of you practice self-care like this? I forgive myself for past mistakes by bathing myself in a river of compassion, which we're obviously like drowning ourselves in, right? Like that's not what self-care is either. So what I'm going to spend the rest of this training I'm talking about today is what it actually is and what we are after. And I want to start by talking about compassion fatigue, because compassion fatigue is now the umbrella term we have for all of those things that we know we're at risk for, like vicarious trauma, burnout. All of that is now under the umbrella of compassion fatigue. So that's what I mean when I say that. And I'll start here with a quote from Dr. Remen, who says, "The expectation that we can be immersed in suffering and loss daily and not be touched by it is as unrealistic as expecting to be able to walk through water without getting wet," which is to say, it's not going to happen. We are walking into the ocean of the people that we serve, and so it makes sense that we're going to get wet as a part of it. It's to be expected. And so while being a helping professional working in this field can be very rewarding, it can also be very demanding. Helping professionals may experience compassion fatigue, and more often than not, we're more likely to experience it than we are not. And it reminds me of this quote of Viktor Frankl that I've always loved, which is, "What is to give light must endure burning." So basically what we're trying to figure out with provider wellness is how do we minimize the burning So that way we don't put our own light out. And though we may be familiar with the terms compassion fatigue, burnout, vicarious trauma, we may not always fully realize the impact. And the fact of the matter is, the costs of caring are very real, even if we're not conscious of and clocking them in real time. So I have a short activity I'd like to do here with you, where I'm going to ask you to map the cost of caring on your own body and your own life. And so you can do this one of several ways. If you've got something to write on next to you, you can write your own map out. You're also welcome to submit answers into the chat box, because that might help jog other people's brains for what helps them. Or if it feels safest to you to just keep the answers to yourself and register them in your own mind, you're welcome to do that as well. Okay. But in thinking about in doing this work, I want you to think about, what is the cost to your body? Where in your body do you carry your work? Is it tight shoulders, shallow breathing, fatigue, headaches, indigestion? Like, I know for me specifically, my jaw starts hurting at the end of a day. Like, I know I've got to be doing the teeth clenching. But where in your body do you feel your work? What about emotions? What emotions linger with you after tough interactions, after working with difficult clients or coworkers, or after hard days? What emotions are there? Is it helplessness? Is it guilt? Is it numbness? Is it exhaustion? Hopelessness, maybe? What about thoughts? What thoughts creep in when you're experiencing work stress? Is it something like, I'm not doing enough? Is it that I'm a fraud? Are you experiencing imposter syndrome? Everybody else has this figured out where I don't. Is it, this shouldn't bother me? Do you get to what we call shoulding on yourself? That I should be doing, feeling, being something than I am. What are those thoughts at the end of a long day? And what's the behavior or the impact? How does this stuff show up in your day-to-day? Do you notice that you're in increased risk of isolation or withdrawal or detachment from your family, your life, your loved ones? Do you find yourself extra irritable? Are you more prone to overeat or engage in some other compulsive behavior? Does it mess with your digestive system or your insomnia? What are the ways that this work shows up in your daily life in that sense? And then maybe think about the relationships in your life. Who gets impacted when you're busy dealing with stuff from work? Who is neglected maybe? When you're stressed, who do you have additional conflict with? Is it a child? Is it a parent? Is it a spouse, a friend, a loved one? And then what is the spiritual or existential cost to you? How has this work challenged you in these ways, in the sense of, how has it challenged your sense of meaning or purpose? How does it challenge your levels of hope? What does it do to your faith in humanity? And then we'll give us all just one more minute to capture any last thoughts there. I know I haven't given a whole lot of time because it's a short training, but did want to give us just a little bit of space to maybe start thinking about how this stuff shows up in our life. So now I want to talk about the neuroscience of caring. And the reason that this is important is that each of these impacts that you just listed, either in your mind or wrote down, is evidence that empathy is real, that you are feeling with people, that you are feeling the stress that your folks are feeling, and that you also are absorbing this work and what your clients are carrying. And again, this isn't always a conscious thing. There's this idea that burnout doesn't happen out of just nowhere, but sometimes it can hit us like, a ton of bricks, and we think, whoa, where did that come from? Because we're not picking up all of the trauma and stuff that we're absorbing. that is bringing that compassion fatigue or that burnout on. And so again, it gets back to the basics of our neurobiology. So in our brain, we have a specific type of brain cells that are called mirror neurons. And they fire both when we are doing an activity, but they also fire while we're watching somebody else do an activity. And this is adaptive to us. This is a part of our evolution that has served us in at least three major ways. And that's imitation and learning. So especially like when we're infants or we're children, we're growing up, when we're learning how to speak, we're learning how to recognize facial features. We're recognizing what certain gestures means. We're learning to pick up on social cues. That's an important part of us learning how to be a part of our world and our tribe in the sense of human beings being a tribal species. We have to belong to the pack in order to survive, right? The imitation and learning, the mirror neurons, also protects us in that we learn from other people's mistakes. When we see someone else touch a hot stove and we see that it hurts and that it burns and they're screaming and they're crying and maybe an ambulance is being called, we learn that ourselves, that touching the hot stove is bad. And, some of us, maybe like myself, we're still adamant about learning everything the hard way. But these neurons help to guide us, to help prevent us from learning as much the hard way or as little the hard way as absolutely necessary. The mirror neurons are also important for co-regulation. And so this is important if I'm with my group of humans and everybody's calm and enjoying their dinner or, relaxing, having good time, laughing, then it tells me that I can set my own anxiety down and be a part of the group and be calm and co-regulated. The alternative to that is if there's somebody running down the street screaming fire, murder, whatever, and they're saying run, run, run now as fast as you can, the mirror neurons and that co-regulation means that we're just as likely to take off in that direction that they're going, even if we don't fully understand what the problem is. And again, it's a means of survival. If we misunderstood what was going on and we ran for no reason, like, oh, well, we got some extra steps. But if we stopped and we thought, hey, why might this person be running? And there's an actual tiger after us, and our pausing to wonder what's going on just made us the tiger's dinner, right? So it helps us in that sense. And then for us, specifically in this work, this is where mirror neurons come in, is there is what is behind our empathy, our ability to connect with another human and to put ourselves in their shoes to understand what it is that they're going through. And of course, this is vital to the work that we do. It's one reason why peer support is so important because peers lead with empathy. And even clinicians. There was a time, even young in my career, I won't give my age away, but early in my career, clinicians were still kind of practicing that tough love and finger wagging. But what we know now is that empathy is where the magic happens. When folks understand that we get it, they're more likely to engage and connect with us. So think about it. When you're with a client and there's something going on, they're losing their housing, they don't have a place to stay tonight, whatever it is, they're upset with their family that's just kicked them out. They're launching into distress, sad, fearness, rage. And so we observe that in them, and our mirror neurons activate in our brain and they correspond to those same areas of our brain. So we start feeling the distress, the sadness, the fear, and the rage. And so because the mirror neurons are activating those parts of our brains, then we begin to feel what they feel. So our heart rate also increases, our breathing gets shallower, our muscles get tense, our facial expressions get tighter because and that's also the co-regulation piece. We're feeling what they're feeling. And so that's how that piece works. And again, even though these neurons are so important for empathy, These mechanisms are what also make us vulnerable to compassion fatigue because our nervous system experiences others' suffering as micro traumas that it is enduring. And this is important because it can't fully distinguish between our pain and somebody else's pain. It's not quite that sophisticated enough. There are levels of gradation where it's going to take our immediate first person experience more seriously. But as far as how it's impacting the nervous system, our nervous system really can't distinguish between that. And so it's like if you think about if somebody is like poking you and they sat there and they poked you, like the first 10, 20, 50, 100, maybe a couple hundred times, it's not going to do anything except for probably irritate the crap out of you. But if they keep poking you, eventually they are going to leave a bruise. And so that's what's going on with our nervous system is these micro traumas that we're grabbing from everybody else that we're hearing in our work are continually to ping or poke our nervous system until eventually a bruise or some of that trauma gets absorbed. And so without enough recovery time, without enough support, social support, which is so important to our resilience, and without having the strong boundaries that we know, which is so important in our work, our nervous system becomes overwhelmed with these trauma-heavy caseloads that we're dealing with on a daily basis. And so it's a good reminder that while we can co-regulate with our clients and we can actually be a source for their regulation when we're well regulated, the reverse can be true. And when they're not well regulated, we can actually co-dysregulate with them as well. And so we really want to make sure we're doing everything in our power to stay as well regulated within our nervous system as possible to increase our resilience so we're not vulnerable to the compassion fatigue, burnout, vicarious trauma, and all of that. And so, and I can't remember if I said this already, but as I go through this, if you have things that you'd like to share or add in or questions that you'd like to clarify, please feel free to jump in. I know sometimes I can get to monologuing, so don't be shy. And so the influence of our mirror neurons in that it makes us experience the same pain that feel like we're experiencing the same pain experience other people's are, is it kicks off our stress response as well. And so understanding what's going on with our stress response can help us mitigate those impacts or those micro traumas or micro pings better so we can stay better regulated. So I'd like to take a little bit of time here, kind of doing just a high level overview of our nervous system. And some of these may or may not be terms that you've heard before, but it's pretty straightforward. And so even if this is new terminology, I ask you to stay with me as much as possible. And if the eyes start glazing over, feel free to get me to stop. But the stress response is made up of, our body stress response is made up of two systems. And that's known as the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. So sympathetic, the only reason it's a sympathetic nervous system, that is the system that kicks off our stress response, known as like fight, flight, or freeze, right? And the only reason it's called the sympathetic nervous system is when they first started noticing these phenomenon in the body, they couldn't figure out how it was all related, but they knew that they worked together. And so sympathetic actually means feeling together. And so this sympathetic term is archaic from when they first discovered it. So don't get caught up on sympathetic. What does that mean? All it means is that the system works together. And so as I mentioned, the sympathetic stress response is our fight, flight, or freeze response. And so it's what's known as the gas pedal to the stress response. So the part of our brain that tells us a threat is coming, which is known as the amygdala. I'll talk more about that in just a second. The amygdala says a threat is coming. And so the stress response, the sympathetic nervous system engages by pushing the gas pedal that says, okay, body, we are rearing up here. We are increasing heart rate. We are increasing breathing. We are increasing blood pressure. We're increasing resources because we've got this fight that we need to either fight or get away from. And then once we survive the threat or we've outrun it, then the parasympathetic nervous system kicks in. And para just means alongside. So it just means alongside the sympathetic system. And it's the brake pedal. So where the sympathetic nervous system says, go, stress response, go, parasympathetic nervous system says, okay, threat has passed, stress response, we're going to put the brake on this now. And we're going to slow everything down. We're going to slow the heart rate down. We're going to slow the breathing down. We're going to slow the adrenaline down. And by doing that, the parasympathetic stress response then restores us to homeostasis or baseline. And so these two systems work pretty seamlessly under normal stress, hundreds, if not thousands of times throughout the day. Like anytime, like you're in traffic and you accidentally almost hit somebody in the back, your parasympathetic kicks in when you look up and you realize there are brake lights right in front of you. But then once you realize that you've saved the car and there's no wreck, you're able to stop in time, the parasympathetic kicks in and says, all right, we're okay. We can continue along with our day. And it just goes back and forth like that throughout our day, every day. So let's talk about these two systems of our stress response individually to learn a little bit more about them. So the sympathetic nervous system, as I mentioned, is behind the traditional stress response of that fight, flight, or freeze. And so it's responsible for mobilizing your body's resources when you need to respond to or flee a stress or threat. And so it works to increase the heart rate, to have additional energy, open airways for additional oxygen. It also makes us breathe faster. It dilates our pupils so we can take in more information, so we can see kind of what's going on around us that we need to respond to. It constricts blood vessels to get it to run to our heart and our organs to help us go like faster if we need to get away. And it slows digestive processes to help us conserve energy. And so we're not taken out of the moment that we need to escape. You can imagine, like, if a tiger's chasing you down the road, that it would be inconvenient if all of a sudden you had to stop to poop, right? So part of the sympathetic nervous system is it stops your digestive processes so that way you don't find yourself in that kind of situation. And the important part to remember about the sympathetic nervous system is one of the ways that it is so effective is it works by taking our thinking brain, or what's known as the prefrontal cortex, it's the front part of our brain. It takes it offline. So that way our the body's survival mechanisms can take over. We don't want to be caught in analysis paralysis where we can't decide what action we need to take in this moment because there's many different actions and which ones are the best, right? So as a part of our evolution, the body learned to take our thinking brain offline. So that way we are just acting out of instinct when we're under threat. Okay. So that's the sympathetic nervous system. And so remember, that's the gas pedal in our nervous system whenever we encounter a threat. Then next we're going to talk about the brake pedal, which is the parasympathetic nervous system. So after a threat has passed, what I'm going to call the PNS, because it's easier than saying parasympathetic over and again, kicks in to restore the body back to baseline. Known as rest and digest because it helps us rest, but also, as I talked about, it gets our digestive juices and processes going again. It's crucial for recovery, emotional regulation, and long-term health. Whenever we live our lives constantly in the stress response, it starts to wear down our health pretty badly. So being able to reset after we've been activated is vital to maintaining our long-term well-being. And so the parasympathetic nervous system works in reserve from the sympathetic nervous system. It's going to slow down the heart rate. It's going to slow down the breathing. It's going to constrict the pupils because we no longer need that kind of visual information. It's going to release our blood vessels so it flows to all areas of our brain. It's going to re-engage those digestive processes and help us to restore our energy. And it's going to also activate sludding, SLUDD, to repair and restore. And so SLUD is an acronym for the ways our body purges and restores as part of the PNS process. So salivation, our saliva increases, again, to help with digestive processes. Lacrimation, which is tears. After a threat has passed, it's not unheard of for us to cry afterwards because we're purging those hormones and trying to soothe ourselves. And then urination, digestion, defecation, that gets back into what I'm talking about with re-engaging those processes after the threat has passed. So again, a good acronym for that is SLUDD, SLUDD. I always think about it of like, I don't know if anybody else in here has a nervous bladder, but that's certainly me. Whenever I get anxious, like the first thing I always have to do afterwards is to go pee, like without fail. And, doing this work, now I understand why, even though that was a lifelong thing. And so the parasympathetic system, though it's vital to our rebalancing, our repair, the thing to know about it is the downside is that it gets blocked if the stress is toxic. And when it's blocked, the body never gets the signal of safety, gets the all clear sign. Sorry, I drank some seltzer water before this and now it's bubbling up on me. It never gets the signal of safety and the all clear sign. And so because of that, the body gets stuck in the stress response. And that's where we're understanding addiction comes from now, is because folks aren't able to internally regulate on their own, get to that default state of safety. They will turn to substances in order to help them get those feelings of safety to better regulate their nervous system because they're stuck in that stress response. So factors determining if events are normal or toxic stress, because I think that's an important thing to kind of distinguish between the two, especially for us and thinking about how this might be impacting us. One is the intensity of the stressor. Normal stress, it's considered manageable. Somebody cuts me off in the grocery store line. I'm not happy about it, but it's probably not going to send me offline and ruin the rest of my day, week, month, or whatever. So that'd be considered normal stress. Toxic stress is something that has overwhelmed my ability to cope. And that might be something like I come home and I find my house is completely burned down. And that is devastating for me because I just had a major loss the year before. And I had so much in that house that meant everything to me. And maybe I had a beloved pet that I lost in the fire. And so you can see how the intensity can get to where stress becomes toxic, where we're no longer really able to effectively cope with it anymore. Another factor determining normal versus toxic stress is the amount of support that you have. For something that could be considered normal stress, you're probably going to have a lot of supportive relationships. No matter what the stress is, if you've got people to help get you through, that can prevent the stress from tipping over into toxic. If you are dealing with something on your own, that can take a stressor that maybe isn't even that intense, but because you're dealing with it in isolation, it all of a sudden tips over into toxic stress. And this is really important part for us as providers that I want to call out, because a lot of times we will minimize our own need for support, either in our personal or our professional lives, but I guarantee you, to have any kind of longevity in this field, having your own robust support system is so vitally important. And that is having friends away from work, family, supportive household members, faith community members, friends, that kind of thing. But it's also important that you have coworkers that you can turn to. Because the thing about coworkers is they are in the trenches like nobody else in your life is. And so that means that they're going to understand things in a way that others can't. And so that makes them an even more meaningful source of support. So do just want to do a gentle plug here to make sure that you are building up your professional support systems as much as possible, because ultimately that just protects your own well-being. And then the duration. How long is the stressor endured? If it's short term, then it's going to be considered normal stress. Usually, the fire example I gave, the fire itself was short term, but then it was really intense. But usually, if it's a short term, one time thing, we can find ways to successfully navigate that. And when it becomes toxic is when the stress is chronic or repeated. And so, this is another thing for us to listen up to, because this is what we get into. Hearing one single hard story would be considered normal stress, but hearing thousands of them day after day after day after day, that's that finger that's just going to keep poking that loses a bruise. And that's when that can turn into toxic stress. So more on why this is important. This is what a normal stress cycle looks like. So a threat is detected by the amygdala that I was talking about earlier. The amygdala is about an almond-sized shape organ within the brain, next to the brainstem, about midway through. And it's the thing that detects threats. So the amygdala sounds the alarm. It says something's going on. We got to take action. So the sympathetic nervous system hears that and says, I got you. Let's do this, and engages the gas pedal. And, all of our numbers go up while it's helping us to survive. Then we survive the threat passes. And so then now the PNS, or the parasympathetic nervous system, engages, and it's the brake pedal. So we're easing off the gas and we're getting onto the brake. So we're slowing everything down. And by that, we're returning the body to the baseline, which is where we'll stay until the next threat passes, or till the next threat is experienced. So that's the normal stress cycle. But what happens when we get into the toxic stress cycle? So starts out the same. The amygdala detects the threat. The SNS, or sympathetic nervous system, gas pedal says go. But then with this threat has somehow turned into toxic stress. Either it's too intense, we don't have enough support, or it's lasted too long. And so what ends up happening is the sympathetic nervous system overrides the parasympathetic. So the cycle of completion is blocked because the parasympathetic is not allowed to step in with the brake pedal, or at least it's not allowed to brake pedal enough to get the SNS to slow down. And so then the body stays in survival mode, which can look like either activation or shutdown. Okay. And that PNS is blocked, the parasympathetic nervous system cycle is blocked, and the body stays in activation. That's where we get substance use and addiction, because folks are trying to soothe their nervous system because they don't have access to their natural mechanisms that would normally set them back to baseline. So that's why we see trauma and substance use, like the Venn diagram, they're almost fully overlapped, right, for a lot of people. Natalie, I can see that you submitted something in there. Oh, yes, what Natalie shared, what nobody talks about. But once you start healing past trauma and your body comes out of fight or flight mode, your body will crave a lot of rest and silence. And that's that PSN, right? Your body finally starts to feel safe in the peace and the quiet, which is why we can let go of those compulsive behaviors like addiction, because we find the calm. And so it's a good reminder that you aren't lazy, and people who use substances aren't lazy, or people who are enduring trauma aren't lazy. It's just their body's catching up on all the years it didn't have the stillness. And so we absolutely deserve it. Natalie, I love that. That is like so on point. I'm actually gonna save that to share with future folks because that's 100% it. All right. So as part of the vagus nerve, or excuse me, as part of talking about the parasympathetic nervous system, I want to talk about the vagus nerve. Because if you have learned about the parasympathetic nervous system at all, you've probably heard of the vagus nerve. If you've done any kind of somatic experiencing work, you've probably heard of the vagus nerve. If you've done yoga, therapy on your own, you're probably already familiar with the vagus nerve. But what it is it's the largest and longest nerve in our body that extends from our brain to most of our major organs. And the reason we're talking about it today is it is considered the main highway of the parasympathetic nervous system that carries messages between the brains and organs. And so it's very important in getting the brake pedal to happen. And so there are two main branches of the vagus nerve. And when I say branches, that kind of makes it sound like I'm saying like there's two distinct versions of it, but that's not really what I'm saying here. There are two divisions of it. It works in two ways here. So the first branch is what's known as the ventral vagal branch. And this is the part of the vagus nerve that supports social engagement and calm regulation. So when we're kind of at our default, which is we're calm and okay and safe, that's usually the ventral vagal kind of leading the show. Then we have the other branch or division, which is known as the dorsal vagal branch. And so I also want to mention that ventral means front, and all that really refers to is this is the front of the nerve that comes out from the front of the brainstem. And then dorsal, if you're familiar with that term, it means back or behind. And it's just that refers to the back side of the nerve that comes out of the back brainstem. So it's more anatomy that you don't necessarily know, just in case those words were tripping you up. But the dorsal branch in normal stress, that is what supports rest and digest. That's what we're after we've experienced a threat. The problem, though, is that when the threat is toxic, when it's that toxic stress, the dorsal branch, instead of going into restoration, actually elicits a shutdown response. And so this can be illustrated by what's known as the polyvagal ladder, which is what you see in front of you here. I wish this thing somehow let me have a pointer. You would think Zoom would let you have a pointer, but up until this time, I haven't cracked that piece. So I'll just have to use my words verbally here. So this ladder right here shows you the different stages of the nervous system. So ventral vagal, we've talking about, that's where we feel safe and connected. And so that's really our baseline, our default, where we ultimately want to be. Then what happens is we encounter a threat. So we go into sympathetic, which is the fight or flight. And then from there, we get to that last rung, which is dorsal vagal. If it's normal stress, then dorsal vagal is rest and digest. And we will use that to propel ourselves back up the ladder until we get to ventral vagal. If the stress is toxic stress, then what happens is that dorsal vagal goes into collapse, and then we get stuck in between the two, between sympathetic and dorsal vagal. So we get stuck in between the anxiety and hypervigilance of sympathetic and what's known as hypoarousal, which is the collapse or withdrawal of the dorsal vagal. And we will stay in between those two, oscillating back and forth between hyperarousal, tons of anxiety, and full collapse. And frequently we go back forth in between the two. Now, for complex trauma survivors, this is easy to kind of see because this is something that they've been living with their whole life, and it's a lot easier for them to maybe call out this stuff. But for those of us that are working in this field, sometimes we're not able to catch it in real time as it happens. So in thinking about provider wellness, I thought it might be helpful to start kind of putting these ideas on our radar. Because in order for us to make it back up whenever we've experienced a threat of some sort, in order to make it back up from collapse, it involves re-engaging the paranormal sympathetic system to get back to the rest side so we can work our way up the ladder. So again, when the PNS is blocked, the body never gets to reset and the body stays in survival mode. And because those feelings of safety are blocked, which is fundamental safety, that we feel like we're okay right now in this moment. As I've mentioned, substances and other compulsive behaviors get used for system regulation because we don't have that internal regulation that the ladder gives us when we've got good flexibility to move up and down. Compulsive, and the thing to know about using substances or compulsive behaviors is that we are biologically wired to do this. It's part of our survival mechanism. When life exceeds our ability to cope, we are biologically wired to seek dopamine, because remember, dopamine is our feel-good neurotransmitter, in order to soothe ourselves, to help us stay within our window of tolerance so we can function. And so that's the thing to know about substance use, and you guys are probably already familiar with this, but as you're working with folks with substance use, is there's no shame in it because it's a biological compulsion. We are wired to do it. It's like getting mad at yourself for pooping after eating. Like, you don't have a say in the matter. Your body's driving you to do these things. And so healing then, as I mentioned, comes about re-engaging the parasympathetic nervous system to help them and us move back up the ladder to safety. All right. I know that's a lot, and there's a lot to kind of keep up with here, and I am trying to get this down to the brass tacks, but it still may be legitimately a little bit hard to follow in a training. Just going to pause there. Any questions, responses, thoughts that anybody would like to jump in with? Okay. So then we'll keep going. Like as I'm talking about this, I'm also thinking about, again, this is the first time I'm doing this. I'm also thinking about, maybe different ways that we could dial it in a little bit more. But so this gets me to where I ultimately want to get today, which is the neural maintenance piece, which is my version of provider wellness or self-care. How do we maintain our nervous system so that way we stay as resilient and well as possible? And that's what we're going to be talking about for the rest of our time together here today. So as we've been mentioning, micro traumas constantly push our nervous system towards the dysregulation. It's those slow developing bruises that we've been talking about. So neural maintenance is the ongoing intentional care for the nervous system to help us dysregulate that, or to help us mitigate that dysregulation. And so it involves both what's known as bottom up and top down strategies. So bottom up strategies are strategies that start with the body, that then work the brain to come online. And top-down strategies are strategies that start with the brain that then work to help regulate the body. And this is important because when the body feels safe enough that the thinking brain, for the bottom-up interventions, we help the body to feel safe enough that the thinking brain comes back online. Because remember, part of the sympathetic nervous system is that it takes our thinking brain, what's known as the prefrontal cortex, offline in order for our natural instinctual survival mechanisms to take over. And then once the thinking brain returns, it's back online, then we can use mind-based interventions to support the regulation of the body. And so that's that top-down interventions. And so together we can use both of them to create a bidirectional feedback loop of neural maintenance between both our mind and our body. Both things are at play here. And so we'll talk about what each one of these looks like next. So starting up with the bottom-up approaches. So bottom-up approaches start by regulating the nervous system or the body. Oops, sorry, here we go. The bottom-up approaches start with regulating the nervous system to bring the prefrontal cortex of the brain back online. And so here's a diagram here of the brain to show you when I keep talking about the prefrontal cortex or the thinking brain. It really is right there at the front of the brain. And then the amygdala that I've been talking about, which is the thing that detects threats first in our body and our brain. It's that little dark blue almond there that you see. So the part of the brain that detects the threats, the amygdala, works faster than the thinking brain, the prefrontal cortex. So regulation has to begin with the body. And this is why we can't out-talk ourselves of activated nervous system. It's because usually the nervous system activates long before we even realize what's going on. Because again, the amygdala works a lot faster. So bottom-up techniques. And maybe I'll even start with you all. What do you think might be some good bottom-up techniques to regulate the body to bring it back to calm? Either maybe that you use yourself or that you use with the people that you work with. What might be some bottom-up techniques using your body to regulate? So it could be things like breathing is a huge part of it, breath work. There's all sorts of breathing exercises that you can do. There's box breathing where you inhale for 4, hold for 4, exhale for 4, and then hold for 4, so it makes a box. There's also, excuse me, now my bubbles have turned to hiccups. What a mess. There's also all sorts of like deep breathing apps that you can get. There's one that I have where there's a circle on the phone that gets bigger as you are inhaling, and then it gets smaller as you're exhaling, so you can visually see like what the breathing pace could be, which is really helpful for me as a visual person. The other thing yeah, Derek got breathing exercise too. Derek, you and I, we were thinking the same thing there. The other thing I want to mention is that if we can do longer exhales, that also helps to anchor the body and calm it down. And the reason for that is what naturally happens is we tend to we tend to have more heartbeats when we breathe in and fewer heartbeats when we breathe out, is just the way our biology works. So if we can extend that exhale longer, it helps our heartbeat slow down for even longer, which can help us kind of get back to baseline and kick that PNS in. There's also the vagal nerve stimulation. So vagus nerve, vagal, that comes from, or the polyvagal ladder we're talking about, it's all from the vagus nerve. So anything that you do vocally, you stimulate the vagal nerve or the vagus nerve. So singing, humming, chanting. If you think about like monks or people who meditate, when they do that is actually serving a purpose. Like it's not something to focus on, but it's actually working to soothe and regulate their body. Also, if you've ever heard the old adage to sing whenever you're scared, same thing. It's not just that it distracts you, it's that it's vibrating that vagal nerve, which works to calm you down. Grounding or sensory awareness, so anything that can bring you to the present moment, whether it's temperature changes, like if you hold like a nice warm cup of coffee, or holding an ice cube, or touching grass, or feeling, an ocean breeze on your face. And it can also be things like looking around the room and seeing how many circles you can find or how many squares you can find, like anything that brings you to the present moment. It could also, somatic practices are highly effective. So anything that connects your breath and your body. So yoga is very good. Tai Chi is very good. Pilates can be good. It's a little bit more intense. So I usually will kind of save it, except for very specific cases, but just general stretching, when you inhale and you just, even at your desk, like stretch over to one way, and then as you exhale and inhale, bring the other one over, maybe even turn your body up to get that real big side stretch. I mean, things that you can do at your desk as well, right? Movement to discharge energy, another great way to get the P and the PNS to kick in. Anything that you can do, like if you think about after a threat has passed, or if you have pets, like after they've been scared and you think about how like you or they, like they just shake, that's part of the body's, it's purging the excess energy that's been built up from the stress response. And so, for us, if we were running from a saber-toothed tiger, we'd probably shake most of that out and burn our energy out from running from the tiger. But in this day and age where our high levels of stress are going to be something probably not involving something chasing us, a good thing to remember is always shake it out at the end. Or like in the immortal words of Taylor Swift, shake it off, right? So at the end of my trainings, I usually have people get up and just shake it off, like whatever that looks like. And it could also be swaying, it could be jumping, it could be dancing, like whatever your body needs to do to purge that energy. It doesn't have to be formal at all. And then maybe also hugs or soothing touch from people. We get all sorts of feel-good neurotransmitters from touch from other people, or even soothing touch of ourselves from our pets, could even be stuffed animals. But if you don't have somebody in your life that you can get regular hugs or kisses from, if it's a dog, you can also do your own hugs, like just kind of hold yourself in this way, give yourself a good squeeze. You could also do some light rocking. We tend to feel soothed whenever we're rocked, or it kind of feels like swaddling, like when you're a kiddo. Then you can just sit and do this just to kind of soothe yourself a little bit. So those are some examples of ways we can bring the body online. Want to give one more opportunity? Anything else you would add to that list for body, ways to regulate the body? Okay. And if nothing there, then we'll go to the top-down interventions. So these are the things that start with the brain that are then used to work to bring the body back online. But remember, we want to do this second, because if we're activated, the chances are our brain's offline and we need to get it back in cooperation with us before we can do this stuff. So the reason that top-down works is because thoughts, meaning making, value finding, reframing can all work to calm the threat perception that we have. If somebody bumps into me, I can interpret that one of two ways. They bumped into me because they're a jerk and they're not respecting my boundaries and they're trying to bully me. Or they bumped into me because they're busy and they were looking at their phone and they weren't paying attention and oh my gosh, they're so sorry. And the level of threat that I'm going to perceive on that same action is going to be very different based on how I interpret it, right? So our thoughts can come into play with this as well. Top-down interventions work to re-engage our executive functioning, so that way that then can be used for regulation support. So top-down things that we could do. Mindfulness, working to be in the present moment as much as possible. Journaling, what's going on? How are we feeling? Why are we feeling this way? What might be going on? What are some ways that we could reframe it? What are some positive self-talk that we can use with ourselves? Offering ourselves self-compassion, knowing that, this didn't quite work out the way that you wanted to, but that's okay, because you're human and then everybody makes mistakes. Visualization. This is one that I have used a lot in my own journey and my own healing, just because when we visualize, it can be hard for our brain and our system to know the difference between what's actually happening and what we're just seeing in our mind's eye, which is like why when we dream and we wake up and we're sweating, even though we've actually haven't been doing anything, it's because our body's still responding as if something's going on. And so the same thing works for visualization. So, for instance, for me using visualization, it's usually something that I'm scared of. And I'll think of a person that I believe wouldn't be scared of this situation, and I'll visualize, well, how would they approach the situation? And how do they feel like in this situation? What narratives do they have? And then picturing myself in the same situation and trying to see if I can get myself into the same mindset, body set, heart set that they are. And it actually is surprisingly effective. I've conquered more than a few fears that way. Offering ourselves affirmations, mantras, whatever the words that mean a lot to you, that inspire you, encourage you to keep going, to continue with your perseverance. Could also be prayers and intentions, asking for what you need or setting intentions for what you need or what you want from yourself. It can also be practicing gratitude as well. And this is so important because of something known as our negativity bias. And this is once again our neurobiology. This is again what we're wired for. So research has shown that 80% of the thoughts that we have are negative, and there's a reason for that. Negativity bias refers to the tendency humans have to give more weight and attention to negative information than positive information. And this makes sense when you think about it in survival terms. So I may have two animals running at me, and one is an adorable puppy dog, and the other is like a giant crocodile. And so even though I want to pay more attention to the puppy because it's cute and playful and makes me happy, I'm going to give way more attention to the crocodile because it's the thing that can eat me and end my survival. So just know we are hardwired that way. All things given equal, we do not offer ourselves balanced outlooks because we are designed to focus on what could actively harm us. The downside of it may keep us alive, but it creates a lopsided perspective of life, and it keeps us focused on the bad stuff. And if we're focusing on the bad stuff, or we're assigning worst case scenario or intention to every action or interaction that we have, it's going to keep us on alert for threats. And so negativity bias is something that we have to kind of work to control to make sure that our nervous system isn't unduly responding to threats that aren't even really there. So top-down interventions like mindfulness and gratitude work to sustain a more balanced outlook that ultimately helps us to stay better regulated. So don't forget about the negativity bias. A lot of times when the gremlins kick in, which is what I call the not so friendly voices in my head, it's that negativity bias at play. They're trying to keep me safe. They're just a little bit misguided in that they are very pervasive pessimists. And then again, into our top down and bottom up interventions, I also want to put social connection in there, kind of for reasons I've already talked about, but it's such an important piece. It bears repeating. Safe and supportive and responsive social interactions, they activate the ventral vagal, right? So that's safety and calm, the very top rung of that ladder. And it actually works as both the top-down intervention and that the brain perceives safety because we're with safe people, but it also works with the bottom-up intervention and that the brain becomes soothed because we get all sorts of wonderful regulating chemicals that come with social interactions. And that includes oxytocin, which is our bonding chemical that helps us to bond to one another. Dopamine, which is our ultimate feel-good neurotransmitter. Endorphins, which once again makes us feel good. Endorphin, that's a combination of the words endogenous and morphine. So endogenous meaning internal, so it literally means internal morphine. So the body's own opioid that it produces. And then serotonin, which is our well-being neurotransmitter. It's what gives us a sense of happiness and well-being. And so creating both professional and personal supports is key to survival in this field, in this career, and also beyond that, just a happy, well-regulated life in general. As humans, we are biologically wired to be dependent on another. And so we can't forget about that. We cannot heal and we cannot thrive in isolation. And that's not only true for our clients, but that is just as true for us as well. So many of these practices that I've been talking about in this section are micro practices that we as providers can do in real time during the workday to prevent cumulative dysregulation, to prevent those bruises from showing up in our nervous system. My best suggestions for you is, if you're not already doing this work, is to try a wide plethora of both top-down and bottom-up interventions so you can find what works best for you. Because just like anything else, not everything is going to work the same for everybody else. And so, we want to see and kind of play with what works best for us. And some you may find work better for different situations or moods or circumstances. So it's good just to have a good library across the board. And then the other tip I want to give you is to try using a scale from 1 to 10 to measure the effectiveness of these interventions. Because some of these interventions, like, if somebody is melting down in crisis mode, having a really awful day, and I tell them, I don't know, let's think of a mindful grounding exercise. I tell them, name dog breeds in alphabetical order. To say that to them while they're going through something really heinous is going to feel a little bit like rearranging deck chairs on a sinking ship, right? But if you can put numbers to it, you actually will start to notice that it makes a difference. So as I was started getting into this work, this was a suggestion a therapist gave me because that was my response. I was like, I feel like you're giving me tiny band-aids for gushing knife wounds, and it's not going to do anything. So she told me, before using one of these exercises, measure my anxiety on a scale from 1 to 10, and then after doing one of these exercises, measure my anxiety on a scale from 1 to 10. And I kid you not, when I do this, almost always the number will have dropped at least 1 to 2, if not 3 points. And it makes sense because our thoughts track each other. Like, one thought leads to another thought, which leads to another thought. And while our thoughts are going offline with our negativity bias, our nervous system is being triggered. And so we're having anxiety, and that anxiety is triggering our thoughts, which are going faster and faster. So I can remember the first time doing this, I thought, okay, I'm going to do this. Like, what is my anxiety level right now? And I'm like, I'm not going to be, it sounds dramatic, but I'm not going to lie. I'm going to say it's an 8. And she had me do one of these mental grounding exercises. And afterwards, I could easily say it was a 6. And it floored me that something as stupid as listing dog breeds in alphabetical order brought my anxiety level down 20%. And that was like in under 60 seconds. So there is something to this. Like, if you don't have your own buy-in yet, try the scale from 1 to 10 before and after and see if you can get some buy-in for yourself on this stuff. And so, really what I'm trying to say here is that good self-care and neural maintenance comes from concerted, ongoing, tiny efforts throughout the day, all day, every day. And we see so much better maintenance, perseverance, and resilience, as opposed to when we get into the mindset of one day I'm going to do this Herculean effort that we'll get to someday, which is, one day I'm going to have enough space, I can take that 2-week vacation to Hawaii or whatever, and then I'll get calm and centered. And it just doesn't work like that. So this is my gentle nudge to you to quit putting off the one days, let go of those. And every day in this moment, even while you're listening to me, pay attention to your body. Are you stressed because I'm talking gibberish? because you're bored, because you're having to multitask while you're listening to me at the same time. And in this moment, what can you do to kind of bring some regulation to your nervous system? Something as gentle as relaxing your jaw, dropping your shoulders, letting your arms flap down beside you, maybe taking a breath. And those little things are all that I'm asking you to do. So they're not tricky. The trickiness of them is just remembering to do them on an ongoing basis and tying them to be triggered to do whenever we feel our anxieties stop going up. And so, just think of your wellness like a piggy bank. And every time you do something to take care of yourself, or every time you do something for neural repair, you take the deep breath, you go outside, you touch grass, you spend some time with the coworker on a water cooler. All of those things are putting coins into your piggy bank. And when we have a full piggy bank, we stay healthy, we stay well, we stay fully compassionate because we have savings to draw from. As opposed to when we go the one day I'll get to it route, what we end up is with the empty piggy bank that leads to emotional and spiritual bankruptcy. And that's not where we want to be, because you all are our greatest field, our greatest resource in this work and in this field. And if we lose you, then our clients lose you, and it just goes downhill from there. So I make a plug only because we depend on you, but also because I want you to be healthy and happy, to live your best life, not just to be more productive, if that's what that sounds like. That's not what I'm trying to say, but just that you yourself are as healthy as possible. So every coin, every breath, every break, every exercise we do to regulate ourselves matters. And so ultimately you got to remember to nourish if you want to flourish. All right. So that's it for me today. That's what I have with you. We do have time for any follow-up questions or comments if anybody has anything to add to that. And while you all are, and you can speak it out or put it in the chat box. And while you all are thinking about that, I am going to pass it to Caroline briefly to tell us how to wrap up for today and to get credit for being here today.